Bizarre Reality Media.
Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on.
They're not dogs, they're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. I think you guys are going to want to come film this.
Put him out.
I just see it.
Sightings of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said there's a monster on the wall.
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
Welcome back, Bizarre Society, to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that some call Shane, aka the original Shane Squatch. And alongside me, as per usual, I have the big bad boo daddy himself, Sir Orin Felix.
Can Boo Daddy's little boo-boo keep a secret?
Can Boo Boo Daddy's little boo boo keep a secret? That's the real question here.
Where in the hell did that one come from?
That was a completely accidental thing that I stumbled across. I don't even know where it's from. I just looked up Boo Daddy, and that was one of the things that popped up, so I took it. And then I altered it a little bit.
Something like super offensive, and we're going to get canceled for it. That's very much in play here.
It could definitely be possible. I definitely altered it a little bit. The original was, come here, can you be can Boo Daddy little keep a secret? It doesn't have the Boo Daddy in the beginning. I stole the boo from the end when he's saying little boo boo, and I put it in the beginning. So I altered it at least a little bit. So at least, if it is from that movie, it's not fully from something, because we've altered it slightly a bit. But
well, hey, if any of you listeners out there know what the hell that's from, let us know.
Yes, please tell me, because I would love to know. It's probably from like Black Snake Moan or something. It sounds like something from that movie, if you remember that movie.
That's probably best case scenario. Might be from a different snake moaning
or might be a
picture, if you know what I'm getting at.
From one of those accidental movies that you find on LimeWire, if you know what I'm saying. This ain't no Edward Scissorhands.
Sure. Accidental.
Well, I guess moving on to the more pressing matters, of course. For anybody that listened to last week's episode talking about Phantom Time, the new chronology, and Satan's Little Season, we threw out on that episode saying that if you guys might be interested in hearing more about Tartaria, we would have a perfect guest for that. So it won't be happening today, but next week, of course, we'll be having a guest on who's going to be talking about that. So you guys spoke up and we listened. So we wanted to throw that one out there. So if anybody wants to throw any other opinions, we would love to absolutely hear them.
And our next episode of Bizarre Inquiries, our YouTube live show, is going to be on Thursday, March 5th. It's going to be roughly 7:15 Eastern Time on the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube channel. So you guys be sure to join us in the chat, and also send any questions or articles or videos or anything like that that you want us to inquire about. And if anyone is interested in being a guest on the show, sharing their experiences, or getting up with us for any reason whatsoever, Shane, how can they do that?
First and foremost, you guys can get up with us through our email, which is bizarreencounters@outlook.com. If you guys have any professional inquiries, you guys can get a hold of us through bizarrerealitymedia@outlook.com. And last but not least, if you guys would like to, you guys can call or text us 24/7. And our Bizarre Reality Media hotline number is 313-364-1551. And if you guys happen to miss that, you guys can find it down in the show description.
And as always, all the shit we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description. So tonight's episode is something that Shane has put together. I know he's been super excited to share it with you guys. It's something that we've touched on some of the concepts a little bit, especially back when we did our Freemason series. That's probably been a year and a half ago at this point.
Time flies, man. That's crazy.
Yeah. So we might need a little refresher on a lot of this. So Shane, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to be talking about tonight?
So what we're going to be getting into tonight, as far as the way that the show's been going, it seems like we've been talking about a lot of occult concepts, like you were kind of mentioning with the Freemason episode and everything. So trying to like bring it back a little bit, of course. I wanted to kind of lay down some of like the roots of these concepts. So of course, at some point, maybe we'll cover like Zoroastrianism, because that goes farther back than like Hermeticism goes. But today we're going to be talking about Hermeticism. Particularly, we're going to be talking about the 7 Principles of Hermeticism, which some refer to as the master key in occultism. But we'll get back to that a little bit later on. But first, of course, we have to discuss what exactly is Hermeticism. So, Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary figure in the Hermetic tradition, is credited with authoring a body of text known as the Hermetica, which had a profound influence on Western esotericism, alchemy, and mystical thought. The Hermetic philosophy, with its emphasis on the unity of the cosmos, the correspondence between the microcosm and the macrocosm, and the path of spiritual transformation, shares significant parallels with modern science and psychology, such as the psychological theories of Carl Jung, particularly his concept of the individual process and subconscious exploration outlined in the Red Book. At the heart of Hermetic philosophy is a vision of the cosmos as a unified, interconnected whole, in which the divine is immanent and permeates all levels of existence. This holistic worldview is encapsulated in the famous Hermetic maxim, as above, so below, which suggests that the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, the individual, are mirrored images of each other, governed by the same principles and laws. The understanding of the cosmos has important implications on how we perceive the nature of reality and the place of the human soul within it. It suggests that the individual is not separate from the larger universe, but is intimately connected to it, and that the path of spiritual awakening involves aligning oneself with the divine principles that underlie all of creation. 3 forms of arcane knowledge emanate the Hermetic arts, which are alchemy, which obviously everybody kind of knows what that is, seeking material perfection, and operation echoing the sun's transmutive light. Astrology interprets the influence of celestial motions upon the terrestrial affairs, and thurology, which is performing rituals and invoking the divine presence. Before we continue on, do you have any questions about Hermeticism or anything you want to throw in, Matt?
No, not really. Just a couple stray thoughts before we really dive into this. I think this is super interesting in light of, a lot of things we've talked about on the show throughout the years, and, the fact of it touching on ritual and like the sun's effect on us and things like that. So I think this is just a really interesting concept that, like I said, touches on a lot of things. And I think as we go through it, we're going to see a lot of connections, probably with things that we didn't even think of at the time. But I bet as we kind of talk through this, we're going to see a lot of connections to things we've talked about that we might not even realize. So.
It's kind of weird, man. Like, I've been heavily diving into like all this occult stuff lately, and it kind of seems like you do this rabbit trail of like, all right, here's the oldest idea. And then you find something that goes even farther than that, and you're like, all right, here's the oldest idea. But essentially, it's like, it doesn't matter if it's Hermeticism, Christianity, like all of these religious practices mirror a lot of the same concepts. It's just how you go about mirroring these concepts. And of course, there's little extra added details, but like the foundations, if you really start like breaking this stuff down, as we will do as we kind of go further into this episode, you start realizing that a lot of this foundation is the same. And even so, I mean, even getting into like Christian religion, everybody knows how much time was spent in Egypt and around the Egyptian area during like the early Christian, texts and everything. So, of course, people that were aware of that religion would have been fully aware of Hermeticism and like the concepts of Hermeticism. So, people talk about this whole thing about the Bible and like context of the Bible and the basic knowledge that people would have had at the time that they didn't feel the need to put into the Bible. I almost kind of feel like at least the 7 Principles of Hermeticism might fall into that category, that it's not listed in the Bible, but it's still a concept that's talked about in the Bible in a different way, because again, the philosophy was something that everybody was aware of at the time. So I feel like it was, again, one of those matters that it's like, you don't need to tell somebody information if it's something that everybody that's in the area is aware of, because especially in Egypt, like this was, part of the regular religious practice, which we'll get into a little bit further on here, but.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so of course you have to hop into who exactly is Hermes Trismegistus. The legendary figure of Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes Thrice Great, is the inspiration for the spiritual teaching known as Hermeticism. He is the syncretic joining of the Greek deity Hermes, the winged messenger of the gods, and his Egyptian counterpart, the ibis-headed moon god Thoth, which I guess I'll throw in a little bit more detail on this one in a second, but Hermes and Thoth were considered to be one of the same. Both of them were psychochomps guides in the land of the dead. Thoth is also the god who presides over speech and interpretation. He's the inventor of the alphabet and the art of writing. Ever since humans have been using writing to preserve the vast array of accumulating knowledge, Thoth it's called the heart of Ra, the tongue of the Atum and the throat of the god who his name is hidden. As divine speech personifies, he is creator of each branch of knowledge, human and divine. When Hermes met Thoth in Greco-Egyptian Alexandria, Hermes Trismegistus was born. Not long after, followers of the thrice great one came together and devoted themselves to understanding his wisdom and to achieving the same cosmic illumination that Hermes himself had experienced. Hermes Trismegistus is the author of the Hermetica and is also the author of the famed Emerald Tablet, which is the source of the most well-known Hermetic diem, as above, so below, as I was talking about earlier. The key to astrology, alchemy, and other occult sciences, the Emerald Tablet has a history as mysterious as its authors. And just to throw this one in here, because I know I was mentioning it on the last episode that we were talking about, so I want to make sure that I also threw this one in here. The whole divide with Hermes Trismegistus and Thoth. Like, I think we've talked about this a bunch of times on the show. The whole idea that these same characters or archetypes will mirror through pantheons, and essentially we're talking about the same guy being like portrayed in different religions and different views. Like, this is exactly what that is. This is like a prime example of that, where it's like not even questioned. But the weird part comes in is people debate whether or not Hermes Trismegistus was a real person, and that's kind of where the hard part comes in, because you could definitely assume that he was a real person, that maybe his wisdom and his knowledge became so vast that it almost became godlike. So people started creating these stories and essentially created an entire like mythos around a real person. Or the other side that you could think of is what we're mentioning on the other show, that, you know, if there was an originator that started writing these concepts as a respect to that person's school of thought, you know, there could be a continuation of people that are authoring these ideas, not under their own name, but under the original author of that school of thought. So I think that a mixture of these two things has made Hermes Trismegistus this like fictitious character. But at least from like a lot of my research, I think he's kind of like one of those characters like Jesus, where he was talked about in so many different places by so many different people, and he was talked about so highly of that it was almost like Telephone, where he became this character that became like beyond history. Like it got to a point where like he was so noted that people started like questioning his existence. Like, I think essentially the same thing played out with Jesus as with Hermes Trismegistus. Like, whether or not you believe in the power that they actually had, I still think that regardless, like both of these people were real people, but this seems to be up for something that's up for debate. But,
well, yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in here. So I actually went back and read some of my notes and research that I did for the Freemason series in preparation for this. And correct me if I'm wrong, you've probably looked into this much more recently than I have, but kind of what I came across was this idea that, you know, and this is where it gets kind of confusing and squirrely, but there's, you know, Hermes, the Greek god, and then that's the figure that's kind of associated with Thoth. And then this idea of Hermes Trismegistus, you know, Hermes the thrice great, this figure is kind of the third interpretation, third reincarnation, yeah, if you will.
Because there's some people that even believe that he reincarnated later on as Moses and as Jesus, just to throw that in. But that's more of like the Gnostic text. But like that concept of him being reborn is already something that exists in the mythos.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, that's where it gets kind of confusing is, you know, there is this, you know, very established kind of, you know, Greek figure in, you know, Greek mythology, the pantheon of gods and whatnot. And then there's this other figure, this Hermes Trismegistus, who, you know, very well could have been a real person, quote unquote, in, you know, some way, shape or form. But it does seem like you said, like he kind of transcended the idea of just a normal man. And these teachings have kind of taken on a life of their own. It kind of like, you know, the symbol and what he stood for kind of transcended, you know, whether it was a mere mortal or whatnot.
Exactly. Or like some people, like I said, even believe in the whole like reincarnation concept, that like Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, and Hermes, like the Greek god, were all just reincarnations of the same person. Which, to throw this one in here, this is where stuff gets a little bit weird, and I wanted to get a little bit more clarification on it before I did an episode on it, but I think I was mentioning on the last one. So there is two different variations of the Emerald Tablets. There's the Emerald Tablets by Hermes Trismegistus, which if you buy the book, look at the book, it's literally the 8 laws stated And then there's 100 different interpretations of it. Some of the weirdest ones I saw was there was Newton. He actually had an interpretation of the Emerald Tablet. There was like Blavatsky, of course, that had like an interpretation of the Emerald Tablets, because it comes from the original Arabic, and then it ends up getting like broken down into different languages. So of course there's different interpretations of it. But on top of that, there's also this thing that exists in obscurity called the Emerald Tablet of Thoth. Now, the Emerald Tablet of Thoth gets real weird, which is why I want to cover it hopefully on the show at some point. But it starts off basically saying that Thoth is a man from Atlantis. So it's already right there basically saying that he's not a god. He's like somebody that came from Atlantis. And because of them being aware of all of these different principles, they essentially had a society that ended up collapsing because it became way too corrupt. So it starts off with this Emerald Tablet of Thoth with basically saying that he flies this ship away from where Atlantis is over to where these beasts of people exist, which is supposed to be like, you know, Egypt and like that whole area. And he supposedly like lands his craft and builds a structure on top of it, which looks like a lion, wink, wink, if you catch that. And he apparently takes all of the knowledge that he's ever had and he puts it underneath the pyramid, or he creates the Pyramid of Giza as this place to store it, as essentially like this hall of records or like this archive. And it even talks about this weird detail about there being like cylinders that supposedly lead down to this area. And like I said, we'll get a little bit more into like the weirdness with all of that stuff. But if all of that stuff is part of the mythos, I mean, that would definitely explain the whole thing on why every single Freemasonry has this obsession with the pyramids, is because you're looking at it as it's literally the hall of records. Like that is like where all knowledge is stored. So of course that's like the most important figure that exists there. And it even talks about within that text too, saying that like basically anybody that's been initiated into the school has gone to Egypt in order to become initiated, and you have to go to like the pyramid. And then there's the Hall of Amenti, which is underneath the pyramids, which is this place where you can make communications with the gods and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, it gets like real obscure and real fucking weird, but it makes like references to like the flood mythos. It makes references to basically having like a spaceship hidden underneath the Sphinx, which maybe would explain why they don't let people dig underneath it. And that's always been a weird conspiracy. It's because maybe they kind of feel like there's something to it. And even the Pyramid of Giza, not being able to go underneath it that far, and we still haven't fully found the bottom. Is it because there could be some validity to all of this stuff? Whether or not you look at it as this like, you know, mythical thing. I mean, if there was theoretically some society that collapsed before, aka Atlantis, you know, storing a hall of records and keeping knowledge somewhere doesn't really seem that far off. It doesn't really seem that woo-woo. So like, you know, maybe in the back of their minds there is a possibility to this stuff, and that's why they're like, yeah, we just won't touch that area because it might shatter everybody's paradigms if we find something on accident.
Well, yeah, I mean, even without speculating, we just pretty much know that there's all these occult and like Freemasonic connections between Hermes and Egyptian imagery and whatnot. So, I mean, it would only be par for the course that there's something they're hiding there. So I think it makes a lot of sense. But anyway, I don't want to derail us too much. But yeah, I think those are all very interesting thoughts to think about.
So just to throw this one in, because we were already kind of talking about it a little bit, if we call Hermes a myth, we thereby recognize that he is greater and more significant than any one historical figure, for he represents a perennial pattern of the human condition. Hermes is a person without crystalline personality, an archetype that might represent all truth seekers. Certainly, he experiences that which all truth seekers hope to experience. The Neoplaton sage Ambitious writes, Hermes, the deity who presides over ration, discourages as long and rightly been considered common to all who practice the sacred arts. He who presides over true science concerns gods is one of the same without the universe. It is to him that our ancestors dedicate the discoveries of their wisdom, attributing all of their own writings to Hermes, which is basically what we were saying, that under the school of thought, anybody that started discovering new things under the school of thought basically just contributed all of the school of thought to the originator of it, which I honestly think is the case. I think that Hermes may have been or is a real person, and like we were mentioning, he just kind of became bigger than what he actually was. But
it would kind of be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is if like the the disciples or whomever penned the books of the Bible, like attributed all those writings to Jesus is kind of the idea here, that the followers of this school of thought just attributed all these writings to kind of the central figure of their movement or their school of thought.
That's actually a really good way of thinking about it, because like prime example for like the Bible, like Psalms, it's all supposed to be the things that like Jesus supposedly said. Obviously somebody else rewrote those down, but they still accredit them to Jesus. They're not crediting them to themselves. Like it's the same concept. But hopping in, what is the Kabbalion? Because, of course, everybody always questions what this is. And I want to make sure that in the beginning of this, we're able to kind of break down what these different books are, because I see everybody throw these things interchangeably, and they are slightly different. So the Kabbalion, a study of the Hermetic philosophy of ancient Egypt and Greece, is a book originally published in 1908 by the three initiates. Often identified as the New Thought pioneer William Walker Atkins, who lived from 1862 to 1932, that purports to convey the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. While it shares with ancient and medieval Hermetic texts a number of traits such as philosophical mentalism, the concept of as above, so below, and the idea that everything consists of gendered polar opposites, as a whole, it is more embedded to the idea of modern... Embedded to the ideas of modern occultic authors, especially those of the New Thought movement to which Atkins belonged. A modern Hermetic tract, it has been widely influential in New Age circles since the 20th century. And just to throw this one in there, because I found this definitely interesting, because I do have a copy, of course, of the Kabbalion here by the three initiates. I was looking in the front cover, and the original Kabbalion was published in 1908 by the Yogi Publication Society, the Masonic Temple, of course, out of Chicago, Illinois, which makes complete sense. But it gets weird. Where do you think it's published now? It's now published in Salt Lake City, Utah. And to connect in with some occultism stuff that we've been talking about through the whole show, Mormons and their connection with occultism, why is it now that the Mormons, instead of the Freemasons, are now printing the Kabbalion? Is it because, like we've been kind of hinting at the show for a long time, the Freemasons were in control of things for a long time, but now I think that the elite society that's pulling the strings now is the Mormons. I think they took the place of the Freemasons once everybody started kind of getting a hold of the Freemasons. So it's starting to notice this everywhere, that all these like occult publications, all this stuff, it's all switching to Salt Lake City and it's all switching to the Mormons. So like, tell me what they're really studying in their philosophy, man.
Well, there's just a lot of weird stuff with Mormonism to start off with. I mean, the whole like Joseph Smith and like, the being coming down to him and supposedly like giving him the Book of Mormon. Like I always say, change one word and that's a alien encounter. Like that damn sure is one. So, I mean, apart from the whole like cult aspect of Mormonism and the Mormon church like that, there's a lot of weird shit with like the whole founding of the Mormon church anyway. So yeah, that could be like a whole episode on its own, but I won't derail us anymore on that.
And I want to make sure that I throw this one in there too. Everybody hears this concept, quote, with magic, that magic isn't inherently good or evil. It just is, and people use it. That is essentially what the Hermetic principles are. That's what a lot of the occult is. Like, a lot of people on a lot of podcasts, they do this like gore porn thing where they're like, the occult is evil, the occult is bad, they're all Satan worshipers, they're all this, they're all that. That's not the case. If you actually read into the text, the way that they say it is basically, these are the principles. The reason why everybody shouldn't be aware of these principles is because people need to be emotionally mature enough to use them properly. Meaning that here's a law and you can use it for good or you can use it for bad. So it's not inherently evil. Honestly, most of the text that comes from Hermes Trismegistus talks about this concept of following the light, not using psychology to manipulate people in a negative way. He constantly talks about using things in a positive way and using them to make society better and to help people out in a positive way. But the problem with that, as it seems with a lot of philosophy, is that people misconstrue and they take that into a totally different direction. And that's where a lot of the problem with philosophy comes in, that everybody thinks the occult is bad, but it's never stated that way specifically. And to get back into the whole Emerald Tablets of Thoth, part of that whole text and part of the weirdness I want to hopefully cover on the show is it starts talking about this concept, exactly what I'm saying, that this is the laws, this is what exists. There's a side that's going to try to do this for good, and then there's a side that's going to try to do this for bad. The side that it refers to as trying to do this for bad is essentially describing a reptilian race. I just want to throw that one in there. So, and it also talks about shapeshifters. It talks about them basically like taking this like energy from us and using it to manipulate us. Like, it's so weird that it's like, when you're understanding the occult, we look at all of them as Satan worshipers, but we also get into this whole idea about the reptilians. And if you really start understanding the occult, you realize that it's just simply stating the way that things are, and it's not inherently evil itself. So I just want to state that enough, that just because you hear occult, just because you hear Hermeticism, don't assume that it's evil, because that's not the way that the philosophy stated. The only way that you're hearing it that way is because you're hearing it from people that are trying to turn it into gore porn and make it into something a lot more evil than what it was ever intended to be. Because all it was intended to be was simply a philosophy. It wasn't intended to be a new perception of reality. And as we'll get into it with the principles, you guys will kind of understand that. But do you have any thoughts on that before I continue on, of course?
Yeah, I mean, like anything else, it's intended to be a tool, and people can use tools for good. I mean, a hammer can build a house, or you can beat your buddy over the head with it.
Exactly.
You know, so I mean, it's more about how you implement the tool than the tool itself. And what really struck me going through the notes is not in like a demeaning bad way, but a lot of this stuff just like kind of seems like common sense. Like
exactly.
It's nothing like crazy out there. Like it's a lot of kind of like new agey quote unquote topics and ideas, but like nothing's crazy about this. It's all just kind of like, you know, just normal everyday schools of thought at this point.
The interpretation, though, is where it gets weird, because just like the occult, just like the Bible, just like anything, things can be interpreted in multiple different ways. And that's where the problem comes in, because the occult can be interpreted as manipulating your own psychology and having mastery over your own mental. But on the other side, some people interpret it as these are the functions that you use to manipulate reality itself. So it can be brought in, it can be perceived in so many different ways that there's not inherently like one answer or one way that I believe that it's meant to be interpreted. The way that they state it through a lot of this text is that these secrets will unveil themselves in the time that they were supposed to be unveiled. So the way that they word it is that almost everybody that reads this is going to get a different interpretation. And as time goes on, more things in this will make more sense, which if you get into the whole possibility of Thoth/Hermes being an Atlantean and actually having this knowledge of way more advanced society than we could even imagine, it would make sense that maybe he was even laying down some of the laws of like how to use electricity, things like that. But it didn't make sense at the time. But looking at it now, it can make complete sense, which, to throw in another weird part from the Emerald Tablet of Thoth, there is a reference in it that talks about a time when people will harness the power of lightning to create weapons of mass destruction and in turn basically try to like destroy the world. And it's basically saying that the school of philosophy needs to be understood before people get to that point. Otherwise, they're doomed to fall into the same fate as Atlantis when the weapons of destruction start matching up to people's thirst for power, which, to throw that, it's such like a weird philosophy, but like, yeah, just something to think about. We apologize, guys, for the interference, but we will be right back. And now back to the show. The 7 Principles of Hermeticism. According to the Kabbalion, the 7 principles or laws of Hermeticism are known as the Master Key, which involves applying 7 principles for understanding the universe. Once these concepts are grasped, they can be used as a cipher or framework of understanding the occult wisdom, of understanding occult wisdom and philosophy. These principles are mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effects, and gender. Applying this master key is described as mental alchemy, involving self-mastery and transforming thoughts and emotions. This process is said to influence external reality by changing one's inner state. These principles are significant to the Kabbalion, and applying them aims to gain control over one's life and environment through mental and spiritual means. So hopping into the first concept, and the way that I'm going to break this down is I wanted to do basically the direct English translation, and then we'll kind of break down the concept a little bit, because I feel like it's really important to have at least the most direct English translation, because as I was kind of mentioning, everybody interprets this stuff different. So I'd love to hear other people's interpretation of the original words, of course. But the first law, the principle of mentalism. The all is mind. The universe is mental. Everything you experience in your life is interpretations in the mind. Your thoughts and beliefs are shaping your reality. What you experience and sense from your environment are just signals that are processed in your brain. It is actually your mind that interprets this data and gives them meaning. This means that two people can experience the same event completely differently based on their individual interpretations and past experiences in life. Your experience of reality is largely conducted by your thoughts, habits, and beliefs. So, for example, if you are convinced that the world is a dangerous place, then your experience will likely reflect that belief. Everything you experience becomes a self-fulfilled prophecy, where your beliefs define your actions. This principle that thoughts create our reality may be more concrete than you might think. In quantum physics, it has long been established that the observer or experiencer's consciousness can influence the outcome of the events at the subatomic level. This has led to speculation that our thoughts in some way can shape our physical reality. In other words, that our thoughts truly affect how the universe's fundamental elements behave. I'm sure you probably have a million different thoughts on this one, so I'm gonna let you speak for a second. So,
yeah. So just something that I thought was interesting was the last paragraph here, where it's talking about like quantum physics and the experience or consciousness. It's been a while ago, but it was an article or a video or something that I watched or read, so I can't give proper credit. But it was talking about how this experiment was done. And basically, like, this room was built, and they put a spotlight in this room, and it was like programmed to just like randomly shine around the room. And so they, let this thing shine around this empty room and then collected data. And at some point, they put like a potted plant in the room. And this light, like, way more so than like random mathematical whatever should have dictated, like shined on this potted plant. So it's kind of the same idea that like something about, having this organic matter in that room was communicating or, making some sort of connection with its surroundings or consciousness or whatever you want to call it at that point. But when I read that, that's just what popped in my head. And, it's kind of more, a different way of saying the same thing, but yeah, just something I thought was interesting.
It's basically the observer effect, as you've kind of thrown in a few times, that the way that experiment basically worked is that the particles would just basically go chaotically wherever they wanted to go, but as soon as they were observed, then they would pick a slit that they wanted to go through, which, of course, you can see this like literally function in that way, which gets into like the whole placebo effect, which gets into like the whole power of like faith, for example. And just thinking about this in the simplest factor, everything that is created in reality first starts off as an idea in your mind. From the simplest thing of you doing laundry, to having a conversation with somebody, to doing anything. So every single thing that exists in your reality starts off in your mind. So that's just like one way to think about it. And then the other way that they can kind of break down and think about it is that if everything is mental, that means that you are whatever the thing is that is inside your head. You are the mental universe. Like this physical reality that you're experiencing is only created because your mind interprets it in the way that it chooses to interpret it. Meaning that who knows what this reality actually is, because we're only seeing it through the perception that we have through our mind. So literally the mind is the filter to everything that exists in reality. Everything that gets created, every single thought, every single action that gets done in reality first starts off in the mind.
Yeah, and that kind of even, on a more practical level and kind of things we talk about on the show regularly gets back to the idea of like, in these cryptid encounters and whatnot, like two people will have vastly different descriptions of whatever being or entity or creature they saw. So, how much of that is, just we know for a fact that people's recollections and memories aren't that accurate, or how much could it be like, we're actually perceiving these things differently. So, I mean, I think those ideas open up a lot of interesting thoughts, and a lot of this can sound like really woo-woo and out there, but like there's real practical implications to this stuff as well.
And you're already starting to infringe on another law that we'll be touching on here in a second. But of course, before we get into that one, we of course have to talk about the practical relevance of mentalism. Mindfulness teaches you to observe your thoughts and beliefs without needing to identify with them. By practicing mindfulness, you can observe your thoughts, shape your reality, and actively choose more positive and empowering interactions. You can practice conscious thinking to be aware of negative thoughts, replacing them with positive ones. This is what I call stop-swap thought. If it is true that our thoughts have a direct influence on our physical environments, it opens up revolutionary understandings of life. It confirms that philosophers and sages have postulated for millennia. You become what you think and focus on, which is definitely something that's very true that I think a lot of people need to actually start to take time to do in their own life. That the whole concept of, you hear it all the time, that you are not your thoughts. You know, you can't let your instant thoughts control your actions. And we'll get into it a little bit farther on with this whole idea of like polarity and stuff. But once you're aware of the fact of being able to catch your thoughts, think about how much you can manipulate your reality. Because even just a simple interaction of, you catch your thought before you get mad at somebody. And now you can catch the fact that you were about to blow up on this person. So now you can change that interaction to be something completely different. Like, whether you're looking at it more occult or more psychologically practical, like that you can completely change your reality just by catching your own thoughts.
Yeah. And like I said, a lot of this stuff, you know, hundreds or thousands of years ago might have been like cutting edge, but like this is just all kind of like common sense, new, I'm not even gonna say new agey thought at this, like some of it is, but a lot of it's just kind of
ancient thought.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just all kind of normal common sense stuff. Nothing too crazy here with a lot of this.
Yep. So getting into the next concept, the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. As below, so above. That's the full phrase, because obviously everybody, like most phrases, only uses half the phrase, but that was a little fun one that I learned in the process of doing this research. Principle number 2 suggests that there is a deep connection between the macro and the micro. There are reoccurring patterns and fractals at all levels, from atoms resembling miniature solar systems to the repetition of the same patterns in your own life, the solar system, the galaxy, and even amongst other galaxies. Just as patterns and laws apply in the vast universe, they can also hold true for smaller entities such as humans, cells, and even atoms. For instance, the shape of a small branch on a tree resembles the shape of an entire tree, or the way coastlines form at different scales can intricately create patterns that resemble each other. This principle implies that by understanding patterns at one level, either micro or macro, you can gain insight into patterns at another level, which part of this whole philosophy even gets into the whole idea about even the whole idea of trying to rationalize the concept of God. We always refer to him as the Father. Like, this isn't a concept that gets translated directly through there. Trying to understand this connection with this higher power ethereal being, the best thing that you can relate it to is this microcosm concept of how a father would treat his kids. So like, this concept goes for things scientifically, it goes for things philosophically. Like, once you start understanding that this law basically like works almost everywhere, like it's such a fascinating thing to see. And I do have some examples of this if you wanted to get into it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So the human circulatory system and the river deltas, the way blood vessels, arteries, and veins branch out to deliver blood throughout the body is structurally identical to the way rivers branch out into smaller streams as they move towards the ocean, or how tributaries combine to form larger rivers. Atoms and solar systems. The structure of an atom, with electrons orbiting a nucleus, mirrors the structure of a solar system, where planets orbit a sun. This demonstrates how the same organization design repeats at vastly different scales. Tree rings and human fingerprints. The concentric circles inside a tree trunk, showing its age and history, correspond to the unique whorls and patterns of human fingerprints. Both are biometric markers indicating unique identity and personal history. The iris of the eye in the universe. The delicate, fibrous, and radical structure of the human iris is often compared to the starburst or a nebula in space, suggesting that the macrocosm of the universe reflects the microcosm in the eye. The dendritic structure of neutrons in the human brain looks identical to the structure of lightning or the roots of a tree. That one's kind of fascinating too. Veins in a leaf and human veins. The vascular network that carries nutrients and water through the leaf mirrors the human circulatory system and even the palms of the hands. As within, so without. Mental reality. This aspect of the law implies to psychology, which is happening inside our minds. Fears, desires, and beliefs will be reflected in our outer reality, circumstances, relationships, and environments. For example, if you hold a persistent, focused, and positive inner state, your external circumstances will eventually mirror that, leading to positive experiences. The gut axis and soil. Plant axis, just as plant relies on a healthy, diverse biodome, in the soil for nutrients, root health, human lung health is closely connected to the health and diversity of the bacteria in our gut. The two hemispheres of the brain and nature's polarity and nature's polarity. The left brain, logical and analytical, and the right brain, creative and emotional, corresponds to the duality in nature, masculine and feminine, active, passive, day, night, both of which must be balanced for a whole, functional, and productive existence. And last but not least, roots of a tree and human lungs. If you flip a tree upside down, the branching structure of the roots or branches almost perfectly mimics the bronchial tree within human lungs. You have any thoughts or any other examples you may have thought of while I was going through this list?
Yeah, just what I'll throw in here is, like you kind of alluded to before we started reading through the list, all this goes back to like the idea of intelligent design. And, you know, I think, not to sound, you know, like I'm getting on a religious soapbox or anything like that, but I think the idea that there's not some sort of intelligent design inherent in the universe is baffling. I think it takes more faith to believe that all of this just kind of happened than it does to believe that, you know, something kind of set all this stuff in motion. And I think these are like perfect examples of the idea that, you know, I don't care who you want to attribute the intelligent design to, but there is some sort of intelligent design at play. And, you know, I definitely believe in a higher power. I don't, you know, necessarily think that higher power is like a white bearded God sitting on a throne and judging people, or, you know, anything that rational and reasonable. But like all these ideas about energies and thought and consciousness, clearly there's something larger than ourselves. And there's all these examples of, like you said, the micro and the macro mirroring each other. I mean, it just makes too much sense that there is some larger power at play. It's just, again, who you want to attribute that to, who, quote unquote, or what. So, yeah, just some random thoughts I had, again, not to sound, you know, religious or, you know, offend anyone's religion or their, you know, concept of God. But like I said, I just think there is some sort of intelligent design and larger power out there. I just don't think it's some bearded guy sitting on a throne.
See, that's my whole thing, is that no matter what philosophy, no matter what religion you get into, you still get into this, like, I don't even want to say monotheistic, but this, like, God that's on top of everything. Like, when you get into, like, Gnostic texts, you have this whole idea of, like, the monad, and then you have the idea of, like, the demiurge. And it gets into this, like, whole, like, reality concept about, like, you can't see the reality that's underneath, so you think you're the master of reality, not realizing that there's somebody right above you who's the actual true master of reality. And it gets into this whole idea that, like, the demiurge thinks that he runs the entire planet, but there's actually the monad that exists above the demiurge, but the monad is this thing that exists beyond human comprehension. So it's just like God, just like the universal consciousness, all of this concept. Of course, the best way that we can try to rationalize is by putting these human-like qualities on these things, when if you just simply try to break it down, like, clearly this thing isn't anything that looks human. It's something that's beyond our comprehension, and we're just trying to put human qualities on something that's, like, way beyond something we can even fathom. And when you start getting into, like, the science behind different dimensions, or you start even just getting into, like, the philosophy of some of, like, the Gnostic stuff, like, whatever that being is that's all the way at the top, everything below it looks like complete chaos. But to that being, everything is complete organized structure. Like, I think I used this analogy on a show recently. It may have been one of the ones we were talking about, but, you know, you throw a glass down, it looks like complete chaos. But if there is a higher dimensional being, it knows the trajectory that thing's being thrown. It knows the time that it's being thrown. It knows the amount of pressure that's getting thrown on it. It knows how much pressure is being exerted on each individual piece. So to you, it looks like complete chaos. But to this being that's existing on this higher dimensional reality existence, even getting up to this 11th reality, because that seems to be the cap. I'm sure it probably goes higher, but for most philosophies, that tends to be the cap. This 11th dimensional being that's existing in maybe even more than 7 dimensions, more than we can even perceive, like, everything looks like chaos to us, is completely organized and intricate to this thing. Like, this concept that everybody is trying to describe, it's just something that's beyond human comprehension. And the best thing that we can do is just say it's beyond human comprehension and stop trying to just say, yep, it's like this. This is what it looks like. It looks like a man. It looks like this. It looks like that. Like, even if you're standing behind, like, the whole Christian idea, I still think that God would be something that, I mean, even within the Bible, it says you can't look upon him. Like, clearly he's something that's, like, beyond human comprehension to even look at. Otherwise, you're going to go crazy and your mind's going to explode. Like, and you even have references about the angels not looking like humans. Like, why is it that we throw God as this guy, you know, sitting on a throne with a beard? Like, even within the Christian text, I don't think that they use any specific connotation of him even looking like that.
Well, and I think the more we try to humanize something that is just vast and cosmic and inherently not human, we do ourselves a huge disservice because, like you said, things aren't going to make sense that are so far beyond us and our realm of thinking and our reality. And I don't know. I think it makes things a lot easier to believe and accept if it's this like huge cosmic force at play and, not this basically human sitting on a throne judging everybody. And, that goes a long way to explaining why people are, why do bad things happen? Why is there hunger? Why do kids get cancer? Like, if you don't humanize these inhuman things so much, I think it becomes a lot easier to accept those sort of things. And, kind of the analogy I've always used is I don't think. So, all right, I'm going to tell a short story. I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. But one time, one of my coworkers was talking about planting like rose bushes. And, she tried to plant rose bushes one year, they died. She tried to plant rose bushes the next year, they died. And she said, her husband told her, well, why don't you pray about that? You really want these rose bushes to grow. Why don't you pray about it? And so she started praying about it, and then her rose bushes grew. And I was like, my God, the hubris that it must take to think that the Almighty, the creator of the fucking universe, cares about your rose bushes that much just like blows my mind. Like, not thinking that, oh, well, you've, kind of tended the soil for a couple years now, or maybe just the conditions were, but no, you prayed about it and God set all this in motion for your rose bushes. When he's letting kids die and people get cancer, like, that's asinine. So I don't know. That was a long-winded story, but it just popped into my head. So.
See, I feel like I've kind of gotten behind the school of thought that a lot of these like beings, these entities, these different things are essentially forces or laws or concepts that we try to basically put a human idea on, like,
and human personality.
Yeah, like even just simply like one way of looking at demons. Intrusive thoughts. But how do you personify human thought? You create it to this demon. It's this thing that latches on you, that's always whispering in your ear. So you create this personification of simply like an intrusive thought. Like, I think that through a lot of these things, and I'm not saying this is true for everything, but I feel like a lot of these like beings are not things that don't exist. It's just a matter of they're trying to put a name on something that's not physical. It's a force. It's like an existence. It's like a law. Like, it's not something that you can even try. You can metaphorically relate it to something that's human, but you can't literally relate it to something that's human.
And, not to derail us again, because this episode is going to be like 5 hours long, but that even gets back to ideas of like elementals and things like that, and tricksters and, all those kind of concepts. And I'm going to stop there. All right, guys, we got to take another break. We'll be right back. And now we're getting back to the bazaar.
So hopping back in with this, you can use the principle to understand your place in the universe. But to understand the external, the universe, society, relationships, you must first try to understand the internal universe, your own mind, feelings, and consciousness. This principle teaches us that human actions, thoughts, and feelings are reflected in the external world and therefore are encouraged to change yourself internally if you wish to change something in your external world. Although this thought originally comes from older philosophy and mystical systems, we can see it in modern science, especially in quantum physics, where similar patterns and connections are observed at different levels. For example, the phenomenon of entanglement has amazed scientists for decades, a phenomenon where particles become entangled in such a way that the state of one particle immediately affects the state of another, regardless of the distance between them. This has led to consideration of coherence and connection across space and time, which is definitely an interesting thing to think about, man. But practical relevance of the principle of correspondence. This principle encourages you to become deeply aware of your inner experiences and shows you that your inner state is often reflected in your outer world. Through mindful reflection, you can discover how your personal experiences are connected to larger patterns, influencing your actions and interactions. By changing your inner state, your thoughts and feelings, with mindful principles, you can create positive changes in your external life, as I was continuing to mention, because a lot of these concepts, as I was mentioning, can be looked at in a mystical woo-woo way, but a lot of this stuff, man, has been interpreted into modern day psychology, which is something I've been saying on the show forever, is that a lot of these occult things with a more understanding just end up becoming a science. And when you really start looking into occult philosophy, it is modern day psychology. Just to throw that one out there.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So getting into the principle of vibration. Nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. Everything in the universe vibrates and moves. Nothing is at rest. Nothing is fixed or still. Everything is either on its way to or from something. At the most fundamental level, modern physics and quantum mechanics support the idea that everything in the universe is in constant motion. Atoms and subatomic particles are in a state of continuous vibration and movement, even in seemingly solid and stationary objects. Even in a tree and a stone, there is movement. Science has known for 120 years that everything in the universe consists of energy in various forms and vibrations, but Hermetic philosophy predates that idea by centuries. This suggests that this knowledge is older than science recognizes. Scholarly circles may have known about the deeper structures of the universe long before modern science rediscovered these universal truths. Everything from the smallest particle to the largest galaxies vibrate with its own unique frequency, indicating that the natural state of the universe is constantly changing and transforming. Like the universe, your life and your experiences are also in constant change, never in complete standstill. A fundamental insight here is that the change is inevitable and part of life. Recognizing that nothing is static helps you accept change in your own life, both positive and negative. It can lead to a greater sense of peace and less resistance of life's inevitable ups and downs. Understanding that everything is in constant motion encourages you to appreciate the present more. Mindful practice, which focuses on being fully present in the moment, is supported by this rationalization. It helps you to let go of focusing on the past, which you cannot change, and the future, which you cannot predict. The idea that everything vibrates also leads to a deeper understanding of how you can interact with the world around you. Your thoughts, feelings, and actions also emit a form of vibration or energy, which can influence your experiences and relationships. Knowing this can motivate you to cultivate more positive thoughts and attitudes. The realization that everything is in motion has made me more flexible and strengthened my adaptability. By being open to change and adapting to new situations, you can navigate life more effectively and with greater peace. And as I was mentioning, with a lot of this stuff, it can be interpreted in multiple different ways. So, of course, you have the more psychological interpretation of this. But as you guys can all clearly see, there's a very literal science translation of this. And this even goes into a little bit farther with things. I mean, we're talking about the whole idea of like vibrations and frequencies opening up into different portals, different dimensions, all that kind of stuff. But I guess I'll get your thoughts on this one because there's just so many different directions you can go on this one. It's scattered thoughts. My apologies.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add on this one. A lot of it is, like you said, you could go several different ways with this. I think, on a practical, everyday level, it's kind of just, roll with the punches, shit happens. Don't let, things you can't control bring you down. But like you said, on a more philosophical or woo-woo level, yeah, this idea of energy and vibration that we talk about all the time in like portals, encrypted cases and things like that. Again, there's like some real world implications to a lot of this. And then there's a lot more out there esoteric, paranormal implications to a lot of it as well. And I think this one highlights that perfectly.
And this idea, as we get into like the relevance of it, will also kind of get into the more like esoteric concept and a little bit more like psychological concept. But what can you use this insight for? Having a higher frequency is often associated with positive emotions, such as compassion, appreciation, gratitude, and care. By cultivating these feelings, you can raise your vibration and thus approach a more enlightened state. Practices like meditation, yoga, mindfulness, and other forms of personal reflection and self-development help raise your frequency. Meditation promotes calm, inner peace, and a deep connection with the greater whole. Therefore, be aware that your life is in constant change. It's a law of nature, and you're clinging stubbornly to stagnation, or are you moving with the river of life's energy? where are you on your frequent scale? Are you energy or heavy matter? By being mindfully present, you can raise your frequency. You can become more attuned to the vibrations of the universe, whether in meditation, music, or nature. With a higher frequency, you can ride the river of life's changeability and make it to the source of strength and resilience. And getting into some of the ideas of waves, which this will kind of get into the more like esoteric occult concepts on how things can be manipulated through different waves. And this is something that regularly gets talked about in the occult, and this is one of those concepts that, like I said, once you know how to manipulate somebody's mind, you can, of course, use that in a positive way, and you can also use it in a negative way. And when you start getting into this whole idea about vibration and frequency, and knowing that you can play these certain pitches and vibrations and frequencies to get people into certain states, to start feeling certain things, that's when stuff gets a little bit sticky. So getting into some of the mental states to try to break this down, and this is also scientifically backed, so everybody knows, delta waves, deepest sleep, restoration, bodily functions, muscle repair, immune system strength, growth, and hormone release. Theta waves, creativity, deep relaxation, drowsiness, intuition, memory, consolidation. There you go. Especially during REM sleep, and linking to learning and emotional processes. Alpha waves, relaxed focus, daydreaming, calm, alertness, supports learning and memory retention. Beta waves, active thinking, logical reasoning, concentration, discussion making, focus, and problem solving. Gamma waves, high level cognitive function, peak performance, intense function, memory processing, information integration, and learning. So again, getting into these ideas of waves. If you push people into the lower waves, like theta waves and delta waves, you start getting them into these zones of deep relaxation, creativity, and this is where you start getting into the states that you would theoretically like hypnotize somebody, or you would start putting these like concepts into their head, because you can basically like lay these concepts down and they basically will like lay and rest and wait. But getting into like the higher cognitive functions, which is talking about this whole elevating your frequency, elevating your, your brain waves, which again, this is scientifically backed. If you let yourself exist in this place of compassion, appreciation, gratitude, you boost yourself into these higher waves these higher mental waves, and these higher mental waves will result in things like, higher cognitive function, peak performance, intense focus, memory processing. So of course, they want to make people avoid staying in those waves, because it's harder to manipulate people when they're staying in those higher waves, because they become more aware of things around them, and they also retain things. And this is where like things like pattern recognition start to pop up, which is obviously a huge problem with some of these people that are trying to use these connotations for negative things, because if you become aware of the tricks don't work anymore.
And if you push people into gamma rays, they also become the Incredible Hulk.
Very, very true. Yeah. Talk about peak performance, right? Yeah. New level of peak performance. All right. So getting into number 4, the principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unalike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. And this is the exact one that I was talking about when you mentioned that concept a little bit earlier, that one way to interpret reality is that there is no solid full truth, because every single truth that you hear is one person's interpretation. And if you have two different people, then the truth is different to both of those people. So just off of that simple concept, there is no definite truth. Every single truth is but a half truth, and every single lie is but a half lie. Something to think about.
I mean, that's like the old saying when people are like, it's not a lie if you believe it yourself. And I mean, this is just kind of taking that to its most illogical extreme, right?
I mean, even if you fully believe that this is 100% the truth in your heart, it's still subjective, because it's your biased opinion that's been based from your perspective. So you can 100% full well in your heart, like you said, like even not trying to lie, tell the truth. Like, this is exactly what I saw. But it doesn't mean that it's 100% the truth, because depending on the angle you were standing, depending on what part of the situation you heard, the truths will start to shift. So just because it is the truth doesn't mean that it's the definite truth. There is no definite truths. Something weird to think about.
On a more practical level, and bringing it back around to bizarre encounters type things, how many times have we said on the show with like UFO sightings or cryptid encounters or things like that, there are hoaxsters out there. There are people who I think are, trying to make a quick buck, but I think that's relatively few and far between. And I think most people truly believe what they're saying. They believe they saw whatever they're saying they saw. Whether they actually saw that thing or not is, like you said, up for interpretation. but I think most people truly believe what they're saying. And this is a perfect example of that. Like, you can believe something, and in your mind, yeah, you saw that Sasquatch. Did you? I don't know. I mean, did you see a UFO or was it a plane? Who knows? But I mean, like I said, most people I think who are telling these stories are not coming from a malicious place. I think they truly believe what they're saying.
Definitely. I mean, it goes into the whole idea about, again, the law of polarity, that everything exists on a pole. It doesn't mean that it's false. It doesn't mean that it's this. And we'll get into this concept a little bit more because this starts getting into a little bit bigger of a concept. But everything has its opposites. Heat and cold are the same phenomenon, but at different degrees. This thought reflects the idea of duality, which is fundamental in many philosophical, religious, and scientific traditions. Duality means that reality consists of opposites. Everything in the universe exists in opposition, light and dark, hot and cold, up and down. These opposites are not just separate and contradictory phenomenon, but exist as unified whole beings of different degrees of the same scale. For example, heat and cold are not different, but are expressions of different levels of energy. Heat is an expression of a higher energy level, higher molecular movement, while cold is a lower energy state, lower molecular movement. So heat and cold are not opposites, but rather points at each end of the same scale. So this can even, going into like some philosophical stuff, can even go into like emotions, for example. So, you know, if you're feeling hatred, what is the opposite, or one of the opposites of hatred on the polar scale would be passion. So using this idea, you can basically also shift your emotions once you understand what the opposite side of the scale is. So if you're feeling this much love for somebody, you know, the opposite side of the pole could be hate, which obviously you could flip that. But the concept is basically that one is just a matter of being less of the other. So like this whole idea of things being opposite, they're not actually opposites. They are something that exists on the same scale. It's just more or less of the same thing.
Yeah, that's just like the saying, you know, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. You know, that's kind of a crude example for this exact school of thought.
And I guess I won't beat this one too hard, but that's basically like the simple concept of it is basically just once you understand that everything exists on a pole, then you can start to actually understand the whole concept behind the pole. That gets into the whole thing about like truths. It's not that anything is inherently fully a truth or that anything is fully a lie. It's that it exists on this scale and you have to try to find the common ground in the middle. Or even just looking at the concept of dark and light. Where does the light start and where does the dark end? There's not a distinguished spot that these things become opposites. They're existing again in the same place. It's just more or less of the same thing. But moving on to the next law, the principle of rhythm. Everything flows in and out. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swings. Manifestation is everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. Everything has a rhythm or a circle, just like the tide. This principle reflects a universal concept observable at many levels in nature and human experience. Nature abounds with examples of so-called cylindrical patterns that repeat themselves. The tide is a clear example, driven by the gravitational forces of the moon and the sun. The seasons change and even biological processes like cell division and life cycles in plants and animals. On a cosmic scale, we can also observe cylindrical patterns, such as the orbit of planets around the sun and the rotation of galaxies. In the Kabbalion, the image of the pendulum swing is used to alliterate the principle of rhythm, a pendulum moving back and forth between two extremes, two poles. In your life, this can be an experience as a cycle or of good and bad times, like a pendulum, which upon reaching one extreme, inevitably begins to move back towards the other. Life circumstances switch between periods of happiness and challenges. The Kabbalion suggests that while the pendulum swings, its anchor point and the point from which it swings, remains stable. This can symbolize the importance of finding an inner balance or a center of calm. Part of the Hermetic wisdom involves understanding these natural rhythms and learning to work with them rather than against them. Finding ways to rise above the swings so you are not so strongly affected by them. By becoming aware of life's cyclical patterns, you can better prepare for and handle changes of uncertainty. And got any thoughts on this one, man?
Not really. I'll just say I think this one kind of combines a lot of ideas from the previous two concepts of, you know, sometimes you just got to roll with the punches and shit happens. And also, you know, it's opposites. It's light and dark. It's good and bad. I think this is kind of just taking those two concepts a step further.
I mean, this is also too like a matter of like understanding how these cycles work, meaning that, for yourself, for example, people will go in states where they're really, really active and they want to get a lot of work done, and then they'll go in periods of rest. And part of the concept behind this would be, rather than trying to force yourself to do things when you're in these periods of rest, prepare yourself for when you kick back into that period of activity. So rather than trying to fight these natural cycles, you learn to flow with these cycles. And once you start to understand these cycles, then you're able to fluctuate yourself a little bit more properly, meaning that even in the concept of, you're going through a really bad time, there's those people that'll think it's the end all be all, they're ready to give in. But if you have the philosophy behind the fact that it's inevitably the pendulum swing, that it's going to get worse and then it's going to swing back to getting better again, then one, it keeps you on this positive mindset. And on the other side of it, it kind of gives you this better understanding of even just how things fundamentally work in nature, that, you can't force something to grow outside of a season. Like there's certain seasons, there's certain times that things are intended to happen. And once you understand these natural patterns and these natural rhythms, then you can become in tune with them and essentially be able to manipulate your reality better through understanding the cycles of life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you kind of nailed that. I mean, I don't really have anything to add. So.
I've been doing a lot on this stuff. My apologies, but I've been putting in so much, just like listening to a bunch of this philosophy behind all this stuff, that I feel like I could essentially run this show without having the script, but I just want to make sure I don't miss any details. But all right, number 6, the principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Change is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. Nothing happens by chance. Everything has a cause. Within this framework of Hermetic philosophy, the idea that nothing happens by chance is deeply rooted in a perception of the universe as a finely tuned, interconnected system where everything is connected. This philosophy emphasizes that every phenomenon, every event, and every aspect of your life is the result of specific causes and connections, even if it may not be immediately apparent. In this worldview, your actions and thoughts are not viewed as isolated or independent. Rather, they are integrated parts of a larger framework of cause and effect. Every thought you think, every word you speak, every action you perform sends ripples through this network, affecting the surrounding environment and contributing to the collective reality. Which, again, talking about things that seem like they're just common knowledge, but this is somehow hidden in the occult as one of the main principles of the occult, is simply knowing the fact that for every single action that you do, there is an effect. Which, this is another example that I kind of wanted to break down, that everybody already knows these laws. They're just interpreted into different things that we use as regular ideas within regular society. So it's like you're looking at the occult as it's this evil, dark thing with all these Satan worshipers, not realizing that the fundamental keys of Hermeticism, of the occult, are literally just simple concepts on how you live your life that you hear every single day without realizing it. Like as above, so below is so commonly said. How many people know that that's literally Hermetic text?
Well, yeah, and this is nothing against the material or you or putting these notes together, but all of this stuff isn't that mind blowing when you really think. It's just common sense. It's not some deep concept that's going to unlock, some door to sacred knowledge or, some hidden secret. It's just common sense. It's things we do every single day. Just, something as simple as the golden rule, do unto others as you would want done unto you. That's straight out of this shit here. So, I mean, like you said, people who are scared of the occult are practicing these very occult aspects every single day, and a lot of times espousing and preaching them. So it's just kind of interesting to think about.
After doing all of this research, it's so weird to listen to people talk that I hear all these people that are talking from one perspective and talking about how evil the occult is as they're literally stating back the 7 Hermetic laws. It's so confusing and baffling that it's just it's not even fully occult. It's so obvious that people just breeze right past it. I almost kind of see it as that concept that if you really start to break down psychology, the concepts are very, very simple. But people go to school for this stuff because people don't actually take the time to actually sit down and say, that happens because of that. But if you're actually aware of that, think about how much things you can actually change. Like, it's so fucking simple, but just being aware of simple concepts, like, think about how much stuff you can change. Like, obviously everybody knows that you think before you speak, but if you just have a different perspective on it, that, you know, let me think about what I'm going to say before I actually speak it. And these thoughts aren't actually me. These are just my first interpretations coming in. It's not anything like crazy. It's just a new perspective. And because of having this slightly tweaked perspective on things and being aware of these things that you naturally do, it makes it so that you can manipulate these things, which is what gets into the whole idea of the occult, is manipulating reality. It's like, if you understand the simple concepts of reality, you can get ahead of them, which is, again, it's self-explanatory, but once you're aware, like, you're aware and you can manipulate it. It's like a weird thing to think about.
Yeah. At some point I heard a definition of magic as like the process of changing your surroundings through intention and manifestation. And that's basically what we're talking about here. So yeah.
Isn't that exactly what praying is too, though? Just to throw that one in there to not sound blasphemous.
Exactly. It's the same thing as, people who will rag on like paganism and things like that. Well, your Christmas tree is pagan. Dyeing Easter eggs is pagan. So like, we're really splitting hairs with a lot of this stuff. Like, we've been practicing pagan and occult things for thousands of years. People have just, put a new coat of paint on it and want to act like it's something it's not.
Yep. Or turn it into like, oh, I have all of these different secrets, and make it seem like it's something like all the Freemason stuff, man. Like, we covered all this stuff on the show, but there's like books that you can just buy that have like this, all the secrets of Freemason. And it's just like, it's become so obscure that people don't realize that the real answers are right fucking in front of you. Like, it's a weird thing to think about. Like Hermeticism, like, oh, it's so scary, it's so occult, nobody researched into it, but it's just like, it's right in front of you. Like, it's not even hidden.
It's common sense.
Yeah. Hold that thought. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And we are back to the show. So let's hop right in. All right, so getting into number 7. And this is one of the most interesting ones, I think, like philosophically at least. The principle of genders. Gender is everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. Both masculine and feminine qualities exist in everything. These energies must work together to create balance. In Eastern philosophy, particularly Taoism, the concept of yin, feminine, and yang, masculine, is essential. Yin represents passive, receptive, and introspective qualities, while yang represents active, outgoing, and expansive qualities. These two forces are seen as fundamental to the dynamics of the universe and must be balanced to achieve harmony. Carl Jung, in the Red Book, further develops this idea with his theory of archetypes in the collective unconscious, which includes the masculine and feminine as fundamental aspects of human psychology. According to Jung, regardless of gender, every person has both masculine and feminine elements in their psyche. He argues that a fully developed, balanced personality requires acknowledgement and integration both of these aspects within oneself. This means that the development of your personal and spiritual qualities involves creating harmony and balance between these masculine and feminine energies. And getting into some of the practical uses of it. And also, I want to break this stuff down with alchemy, but actually I'll get back to the alchemy stuff in a second. Recognize both the masculine, rational, active, and feminine, intuitive, creative aspects of yourself. Become conscious of balancing these energies in your personal and professional life. In mindfulness training, you practice embracing both logic and intuition, action and reflection, embodying the principles of balancing these energies. Excessive masculine, yang, results in recklessness, excessive force, destruction, and a lack of emotional depth or reception. Excessive masculine, yin, leads to stagnation, inaction, lack of direction, inability to manifest ideas into reality. The consequence: without balance, one cannot achieve the mental gender needed to master one's mind, resulting in a ununified and disconnected self. The masculine will must be directed to work with the feminine imagination to create, ensuring that action has purpose and that creativity has structure. And now I guess I'll let you throw your thoughts on this one before I go back to what I was trying to say, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess my thoughts on this is I think, with today's political climate and whatnot, this one could be a sticking point for a lot of people. But I think, masculine and feminine are in a lot of ways just terms that are being put on these concepts. And if we think of it more in the terms of like, oh, you have a more chaotic side and a more stable side or something like that, I think, again, this just kind of falls into, opposites or polarities and things like it's just common sense. You can't go too far in one direction or too far in the other direction. You need a balance in like Thanos said, balanced as all things should be.
So the part I want to get to with alchemy, which I find absolutely fascinating. So everybody has their idea of alchemy, that it's this like changing of one material into another material. But the whole concept of alchemy isn't just simply that. The concept of alchemy starts getting into like the law of correspondence, where basically the micro mirrors the macro in the sense that your things that go on in your personal life interpret the chemical process, meaning that I've had somebody break this down before who was like a heathenist and stuff, but he was basically saying that like the way that you would like interact within yourself is the same way that like these alchemy principles would work, meaning that, when they're trying to create like a substance, for example, you have the masculine aspect and you have the feminine aspect, and you have to try to balance these things properly. And in turn, by balancing these things properly, you have to have this like ether piece in the middle that creates like this balance. But the whole philosophy of alchemy, whether you're trying to do it for practical magic or you're trying to do it for yourself philosophically, essentially functions the same exact way. And maybe I can get Ben Balderson to come on and really break this down, because he does it like very, very well. But it's crazy to think that like essentially the same way that chemical processes work is the same way that your emotions work internally. And once you really start diving into that and really breaking that down, like maybe I can do an episode on it at some point. Like it's a completely fascinating concept. And you start looking at alchemy as a totally different thing, that I believe at least that the original intention of alchemy wasn't this whole like turning material things into other things. I think the whole idea of alchemy, because you think about the whole idea of the Philosopher's Stone, for example, I think the whole original intention of alchemy was mental alchemy, but people started using that as an analogy for literal things. And then after a couple generations of people studying this philosophy, they started realizing that they could basically take these concepts and turn it into practical things. So I think that the idea that people have of alchemy being this material thing was never what it was intended to start as. It was just a later effect from them learning that you can do these things mentally, and then they actually mirror themselves in the physical world.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And, actually a lot of what you said is concepts I've, read or heard before, that like alchemy is the original form of magic. It's, not so much changing a base metal to gold. That's more of an analogy almost for like changing your environment, like I said,
exactly, and changing yourself,
manifestation. So yeah, like
you're turning yourself into gold.
Yeah, is in the purest form, no pun intended, magic. It is the purest form of magic, and like you said, it's people get caught up with trying to make gold or the philosopher's stone and all that. But like you said, that clearly, if you dig a little deeper into this, isn't the original intention. And,
it's in the name. It's Philosopher's Stone. It's not, like the literal stone. Like,
yeah. And people just kind of went hog wild with this one interpretation of it. And that's kind of, what we accept as alchemy, when basically alchemy is just, like I said, magic and changing your surroundings through intention and manifestation.
I mean, and again, getting into like the breakdown of alchemy with like plants and everything like that, like, the mirroring of it is absolutely fascinating, that it's like they'll give certain plants these characteristics that like, this is a masculine plant, this is a feminine plant, this is a masculine plant, this is a feminine plant. And when they actually start doing these breakdowns, it's like, if you try to make a concoction with two masculine plants, it doesn't work. If you try to make a concoction with two feminine plants, it doesn't work. So it's like the alchemy, the concepts of them putting the genders on them, like work in this philosophy that's like way deeper rooted that I think that a lot of people actually realize, that it's like, again, this mirroring concept, like it's so weird to like break down, but it's a literal mirroring concept, that it's like, who decided what gender this plant has? And I'm not saying that in like, like the modern day ideology of gender, but just like who started breaking down these concepts to really realize this? And it's like, I feel like this is something that's deeper rooted in language than we realize, because as English speakers, we don't see this, but like look at Spanish speakers, look at some of these, I'm sure there's other language examples, but they give masculine and feminine examples into physical inanimate things. I know Russian actually does that too. The Slavic languages also do that. There'll be like 4 different like gender explanations for like an inanimate object. So it's like this whole gender ideology, people have their idea of it now, but like it's something that goes beyond that. It's the whole idea of masculine and feminine. We link it to like these human characteristics, but it's a concept that is beyond human characteristics, but we try to understand them through human characteristics, and in turn we get caught in the mud because of that.
Yeah, so I've got a lot of thoughts about this. First off, like I said at the beginning of this section, I think, people will get caught up in the whole masculine versus feminine thing when really we're just kind of trying to describe different forces that are at work. And like you were talking about with the plants, it's the same thing. People kind of talk about how like dogs are masculine and cats are feminine, and but you can kind of see when you laid out the different energies and whatnot, how that
it makes
kind
sense.
of makes sense.
Cats are passive,
not so much in pure masculine and feminine, but in what those two ideas represent. So something else that popped into my head, as I mentioned on last week's episode, I recently reread The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. And there's a passage in that perfectly kind of encapsulates what you were just talking about with like these issues of language and masculinity and femininity in language. And I actually just found it, if you don't mind me reading it.
Mm-hmm. Go for it.
All right. So it goes, he always thought of the sea as La Mar, which is what people call her in Spanish when they love her. Sometimes those who love her say bad things of her, but they are always said as though she were a woman. Some of the younger fishermen, those who used buoys as floats for their lines and had motorboats, bought when the shark livers had brought much money, spoke of her as Elmar, which is masculine. They spoke of her as a constant, or a place, or even an enemy. But the old man always thought of her as a feminine, as something that gave or withheld great favors. And if she did wild or wicked things, it was because she could not help them. The moon affects her as it does a woman, he thought.
Again, prime example, man. Like, I think that this is something that is naturally in us without us even realizing it. Like, prime example, when you name things, you don't even think about it, but passively you'll name certain things like a girl name, and you'll name certain things passively like a boy's name. Like, prime example here, to try to break this down a little bit, typically guys will name their car a female name. And I think the reason behind that is because it's an idea, it's a concept, like it's something, it's a dream of theirs, like it's this creative force. So that's why they typically end up naming like their car, for example, a feminine name. But most of the time, jokingly, guys will name their tools usually like guys' names, they'll call it like Hank, like, some like masculine like guy's name, but that's because that isn't necessarily a dream. It's like a practical tool that's being used to like create and do something. Like, it seems to be that's how we seem to even break down items, is that when we're naming items that we love, if it's something that puts us in this dream state, it puts us in this creative state, we'll typically name it after a feminine name. And if we name something after something that's like a practical use thing, like we typically end up giving it these male names. So like, I think this is something that's embedded into the human psyche way deeper than we realize. And again, just getting into modern day, I feel like part of this whole occult concept, like I was mentioning, is that you can use these things for good and for bad. So if that's the case, if you understand how much chaos that you can create with this whole like gender philosophy, why wouldn't you try to imbalance it? Like, what not a perfect thing to do to try to make, one person think they need to be way more of something than they're not. Like, that's almost like the perfect way to get into like chaos theory, is to essentially imbalance people at the most rudimental level. Because again, we have this stuff programmed in us subconsciously without even realizing it.
Yeah. I mean, kind of like I said at the beginning of the show, a lot of people think that these are like just very dark and scary concepts, but really, one, they're not that scary, and two, they're ideas and tools, and with good intentions and in the right hands, a lot of these things can be really beneficial, and in the wrong hands and with the wrong intention, it could do a lot of harm. So I mean, it just all depends on how you utilize these concepts.
And I mean, even to break it down into some more practical stuff too, just to kind of give some examples in everyday life. A lot of people hold up on this whole thing about like, this is the role that a man should play in the house. This is a role that a woman should play in the house. And don't get me wrong, I definitely think that like some of that ideology is definitely important for like the function of society. But I also think about this whole concept of like give and take and finding this balance. Like, prime example for me in my own house is I'm not a big fan of cutting the grass. Like, I've always fucking hated cutting the grass. Like, I was forced to do it as a kid. Typically that's looked at as a masculine thing. When it comes to cleaning inside the house, I've always been somebody who's extremely OCD, so I've always been somebody who's very good at cleaning stuff inside the house, but typically that's looked at as a feminine thing. So in my house, my girlfriend usually cuts the grass because she thoroughly enjoys doing that, because she never did it as a kid, and she hates cleaning inside the house. I'm OCD, so I'm the opposite. It's not the typical gender roles, but understanding the whole idea about where these things would typically fall and then being able to find this balance with the opposite genders in the correct places, like I said, it's not necessarily something that's held to like a specific structure of male and female. It's something that if you just understand these forces and these concepts, you can find balance in your own life. So that being said, to everybody out there, they might have some of these like weird spots with their significant other, you know, it goes into that idea that your strong suits might be their downfall and vice versa. So if you actually start to understand these things, you can actually use them to balance things properly because, you know, you may have some feminine qualities as a man, but your significant other might have some masculine qualities as a female, but together those things might balance each other out completely perfectly, where it goes beyond this whole idea about the defined male or female role, which is what I'm trying to kind of get back around to here. Like, if you understand this concept, like it goes behind these like physical distinguishing factors of like male and female. And it can have a huge impact on your life if you start to understand how this balance can work.
Well, and again, it's just common sense. If people get caught up with this is a man's job or a man's role, and this is a woman's job or a woman's role, it's like, well, it's the woman's job to, you know, vacuum or clean the kitchen, or like, motherfucker, you live in the house too. So like, why would you not? Like, I mean, everybody should just do whatever works for them and roll on and not worry about a lot of this shit, in my opinion.
And a lot of people that are spouting that shit are the same people that are, you know, they have something that's going on at home that's making them feel inadequate. So that's why they have to spout this shit. Because it's one of those things that it's like, it's subconsciously always in the back of everybody's minds. And no matter what, like, you're going to think it. It's something that's just from society in the back of our minds. But, you know, you just have to understand that it's just, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. The reason why these things were put into your head is because they're trying to create chaos theory within this concept. So again, if you understand these concepts, it's just like philosophy and dark psychology. You know, if you understand the dark psychology, then the tricks can't be used against you. So this is one of the main components that I really just wanted to really push home on, is if you understand this one, I think that this is one of the main things that'll help with a lot of turmoil in the world today, is this concept. Like, I feel like this is one of the main concepts, the occult that's being used against the general masses at this current time.
Yeah, well, I mean, like we've said throughout the show, and I don't really have a whole lot more to add at this point, but yeah, it's just, all of this is common sense, and it's tools, and tools can be misused or used properly. And, you know, I think there's a whole lot of tools being misused going on now. Well, I mean, forever. I mean, human beings are just inherently flawed individuals. I hate when people, you know, get on the how great things used to be. I was like, oh, back when we had slavery and, you know, genocide and shit. Yeah, things used to be great. But
it's a matter of perspective. Yeah. Like we're kind of saying, there's no definite truths.
Yeah, but no, I mean, yes, all these things are not scary. They're not anything that we don't practice every day. And whether you want to put an occult term on them, I mean, a normal, everyday, not occult thing can be bad if you misuse it. So, I mean, that's no reason not to study the quote unquote occult. That's no reason not to look into these sort of things. And it's no reason to be scared of it. Like you said, a lot of why people are scared of this sort of thing is because they've just been conditioned to be
lack of understanding.
Without understanding or even looking into what they're supposedly scared of. So, I mean, like we talked about in like the Jack Parsons series, and you know, a lot of things we've talked about on this show, it's not that scary when you really dive into it.
Well, I'm really glad that you had those closing thoughts, because that's exactly where I kind of wanted to end everything. Was I want to start out the show where everybody kind of felt like we're going to get into this like dark occult concept, but by the end, I wanted people to realize that if you really study this stuff, again, it's not dark. It's just a matter of you need to understand this stuff so it doesn't appear to be dark. All right, guys, this is our last break, so hold on tight.
And now back to the show.
I guess kind of wrapping up the show at the end, I wanted to leave everybody with this concept and something to think about. Maybe this is something we might even be able to discuss on a future episode of Bizarre Encounters, because it's definitely something philosophical to talk about. Through all of this research that I've been doing, I keep getting back to this reoccurring thought that there's not any definite answers given to it, because I think it's intended to be more of a thought experiment. But when you start getting deep into all of these teachings, everybody gets into this concept that they say all of the laws are but one law. And if you take enough time to sit and meditate on it, you will realize that the universe is a lot simpler than you actually think it is, and that, again, all of these 7 laws are actually just one law. And I haven't fully figured this out myself, and I would like to have a conversation about it maybe in the future, do a little bit of research, because like I said, it seems to be a thought experiment or up for interpretation. But to all the listeners out there, with that thought, I would definitely love to be able to hear some of your guys' opinions. And Orin, if you'd love to give a thought on it before we start wrapping up completely up to you, man.
No, I think that's something great to readdress in a future episode. But yeah, like I said several times through the notes, I think a lot of these things are very interconnected and very similar. And so, I mean, that kind of makes sense that they'd all boil down to one law. So,
and you start realizing that when you start discussing them, as we're talking about, like you start realizing that these things blend into the other one. When you get too far philosophically into one law, it starts turning into another one, which, that might be part of it, But
yeah, a lot to unpack there for sure.
If you guys are interested in supporting the show and all of the hard work behind it, one of the best ways that you guys can do that is by going and checking out our Patreon. Now with just one tier available for $2.50 a month, and with that, you guys will get full access to everything we got going on over there. And with that, you guys have a 7-day free trial. So if you guys enjoy it, you guys want to stick around, we would definitely appreciate it.
And you guys can also check out the Bizarre Reality Media merch store with the t-shirts starting at the oddly specific and extremely low price of $15.68 plus shipping.
Oh! Got myself with that one. Sorry. And if you guys, I know times are tough out there, but if you guys would like to support the show in some other ways, one of the best ways that you guys can do that is, of course, by leaving a review or rating for the show anywhere that you guys happen to listen to us. And what's the general rule for that, Orin?
1 and 5 stars only.
And with 5 stars, of course, you will get our love and respect and appreciation. And with 1 star, you will get ridicule and shit talking. But it'll be fun both ways. So whatever you guys want to do, let's do it. Leave a review, and we definitely appreciate it.
And you guys can also share the show either with your friends, family, loved ones, or even enemies if you think they'd really get a kick out of it.
Because this show is only possible because of listeners like you. So thank you. And if you guys want to keep up to date on the show, the best ways that you guys can do that.
Follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. Do all the internet things. Y'all know how the internet works.
And you guys can also go and catch live shows and video content on the Bizarre Reality Media TikTok, YouTube, and Rumble channels.
And you guys be sure to show some love to our friends and sponsors of the show. We got our buddies Rick and Hans with I Know Squatch for all your squatchy gear needs. And we've got our buddy Joe with Crypto Theology for all your wearable Quidditch
favorites. And if you have some additional time, don't forget to go and check out our awesome friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices to pick up some paranormal investigating equipment, and Sticker Mule to get yourself some stickers for your podcast business, whatever you happen to want. And there are, of course, some additional discounts and credits available for you guys down in the show description if you guys want more information on that.
And as always, everything we've mentioned throughout the show is available in the link tree in the show description.
And with that, I have been the one that some refer to as Shayn Squatch.
And I have been the big bad boo daddy, Orin Felix.
And as usual, I always have to remind you guys to always, always remain and stay bizarre, bizarre, bizarre.
What in the hell is a Trismegistus?